we are going to hear from three people. Zainab Badi, who's a fellow with Claiming Our Democracy in the Greenlighting Institute. Is she still here? Oh, there she is. Okay, hey Zainab. We're also going to be hearing from Sergio Lara, who's the California Deputy Director for Mi Familia Vota. And we'll also be hearing from Fred Nissen, who's a staff attorney for Disabled Rights California. Can we start with you first, Fred?
Yeah.
Does that work? Okay. Thank you.
Good afternoon, and thank you.
Good afternoon and thank you.
My name is Fred Nissen. I'm attorney with Disability Rights California.
I'm an attorney with Disability Rights California. An independent nonprofit statewide organization
Mandated by the federal government to provide legal services to individuals with disabilities in California. We come into disability
mandated by the federal government to provide legal services to individuals with disabilities in California regarding their disability, civil, and service rights.
And under the Help American Vote Act,
And under the Help American Vote Act,
we are charged with ensuring the full participation
we are charged with ensuring the full participation
in the electoral process
in the electoral process
for individuals with disabilities.
for individuals with disabilities
Requiring registration to vote and registering to vote, casting a vote, accessing the polling place.
for individuals with disabilities, including registering to vote, casting a vote, and accessing the polling places.
We have 5 regional offices throughout California.
We have 5 regional offices throughout California.
Mr. Nissen, I'm going to have so I'm noticing it's a 5-page and very substantial testimony that I think we're all very interested in hearing. I'm actually also going to have a number of follow-up questions for you, particularly because I'm really interested in hearing some of the disability rights concerns with regards to all male and Oregon and Colorado models. Would you mind if the gentleman here were to be able to read the testimony and then I can do follow-up questions? That's fine. Okay, I'd appreciate that. It's just we got a lot of folks coming in and out, and okay, I appreciate that though. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Bill Hirsch, and I'm also an attorney with Disability Rights California.
Fantastic. Thank you, and thank you to both of you for being here. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, sir. In a recent study done by researchers at Rutgers University after the November 2012 election, it was revealed that in California, the voter turnout of voters with disabilities was 8 percentage points lower than voters without disabilities. In a report that we have submitted, we have identified barriers that voters with disabilities face at every step of the voting process. This includes voter registration, voter education materials, voting at polling places, including access to voting place and accessible voting systems that do not work or are not set up at all, and voting by mail. Voter registration issues include failure of some election officials and mandated voter registration or agencies under the National Voter Registration Act to conduct meaningful, accessible, and consistent outreaches to Californians with disabilities about the right to vote, voter registration, opportunities, and voting options. To address this issue, DRC, in collaboration with the ACLU and the Secretary of State's office, have conducted trainings in several counties to mandate voter registration agencies. DR speaks at these trainings and about the right to vote for people with disabilities, as well as provide information about cultural competence regarding disability. Another best practice to improve voter registration for people with disabilities is for election officials to conduct outreaches with voter registration and voter processes throughout various communities. We know that some counties take the accessible voting systems with them to outreaches to the disability community. This help makes voters with disabilities aware of the equipment and gives them a chance to ask questions about how they can use the system before Election Day. Once a person with disabilities is registered to vote, they must be able to receive the information about election dates and deadlines. Ballot contents, state and counties both provide voter information in print form and web-based. The need to consult with the Voter Accessibility Advisory Committee for the Secretary of State or the particular county about what formats are accessible. Voter educational materials should be beta tested to people with disabilities, especially those who use screen readers, to make sure they are accessible. In addition, they should be written in plain language. DSC works on a number of county VACs, as well as the Secretary of State's VAC. Based on our work on the county VAC, we note that accessibility compliance varies from 30 to 60% of the polling places are accessible. We understand the challenges that many counties face in finding accessible polling places. However, compliance should be higher. We are concerned that accessibility is not given enough time in poll worker trainings, given the impression that accessibility is not a priority. One of our areas of focus in every election season is to train the trainers of poll workers on accessibility issues and about disability etiquette. For the counties that we can make it to, the counties are grateful to our assistance. Some barriers cannot be avoided but may be mitigated relatively easily. Some common examples are making sure the accessible entrances is not locked, or that there is accessible parking, or making sure the elevator is not locked. The most common complaints we get in our Election Day hotline is that accessible voting systems are not plugged in or set up or are not working. The accessible voting system is crucial to allow people with disabilities their right to private and independent vote as guaranteed by the California Constitution and the Help America Vote Act. The right to a private and independent vote is very important to everybody, including voters with disabilities. For people with manual dexterity impairments, vision impairments, learning disabilities, or intellectual or developmental disabilities, the accessible voting systems may be the only way for them to vote privately and independently. While it is true that a voter with a disability is permitted to have assistance by the poll worker or anyone of his or her choosing, other than an employer or union member, the assistance by another individual must be voluntary and not a substitute for an accessible voting system because it forces them to waive their right to a private and independent vote. The previous Secretary of State had a rule that one and only one accessible voting system must be in each polling location. Therefore, if the accessible voting system breaks down at the polling place, a voter with a disability would be forced to come back at least 2 hours later for the new accessible voting system, if the polls would still be open and if the voter schedule allows it, or waive their right to a private and independent vote by allowing someone else to mark their ballot. The restriction of one accessible voting system per polling place should be lifted. Vote by mail. Currently, California allows voters to choose to vote by mail. For people with disabilities, this allows for those who find it most convenient to vote by mail to do so, and also allows those people with disabilities to vote at their polling place and preserve their right to a private and independent ballot via the accessible voting system. Maintaining this option is essential to preserving the right of a private vote. There have been a number of proposals to make some or all elections vote by mail. Many proposals would include provisions for vote centers where people could turn in their vote-by-mail ballot or cast a ballot. However, it should be kept in mind that travel could sometimes be a serious obstacle to persons with disabilities, so there would have to be numerous vote centers, fully accessible, with multiple voting systems available. There are a number of ways that counties can ensure that voters with disabilities maintain their right to a private and independent vote in vote-by-mail-only elections. When considering how counties can preserve the right to vote in a private independent vote, it must be noted that one size fits all will not work at a state with 58 counties that are very diverse, from the urban metropolitan Los Angeles and San Francisco to the rural areas of counties like Nevada and Butte. Counties should convene stakeholders and possibly include other options. Careful selection of location of vote centers. Many proposals would base the placement of vote centers on population. This would be fine for extremely dense areas such as San Francisco or Los Angeles, but would ignore the needs of persons with disabilities in more rural areas. The layout of the county should determine the placement. For example, if there are 5,000 people in a 15-mile radius, it would not be helpful if the requirement would be one voter per 5,000 voters. Also, vote centers should be accessible to public transportation. Early voting. Open voting centers before Election Day, including the weekends before. This would increase the chances of persons with disabilities being able to set up transportation to the vote center. Mobile polling sites. This would allow greater accessibility to rural voters and ensure that the mobile polling place is equipped with accessible voting systems. It could run either on an appointment basis and/or scheduled times around the community. Email ballots. Many voters with disabilities would be more likely to vote if a ballot were emailed to them in an accessible format. This is not internet voting. The voter could then mark and print the ballot and mail it to the county election official. As noted in my report, the state of Maryland, pursuant to a federal order, issues an online ballot marking tool that voters with disabilities can use to mark their absentee ballots. It is crucial that all individuals with disabilities ensure their right to a private and independent ballot, just like any other voter. In the event of any vote-by-mail-only elections, provisions must be made for voters with disabilities who cannot independently and privately mark and cast a ballot. Thank you very much for allowing me to testify. Please let me know if you have any questions about my testimony or report.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you to both of you. Just a quick starting question. Oregon, how has it worked for people with disabilities? How is the disability community, what sort of provisions were put in place to make that system work for folks?
I haven't been able to get that information. I can try to get that information, but I think they just go to vote sections.
He'd be happy to get that information for you, Mr. Chairman.
That would be very helpful. That'd be very helpful.
What I understand from the research I've done is that they do go to the vote centers.
But from what he does understand, people do go to the vote centers.
Right.
Right. I was
Okay. In every county. All right. I'm still getting my head around the model, but okay, yeah. I'm sorry, carry on.
but I can do some more research.
More research, yeah, okay. Okay, that's helpful. Okay, all right, well, you know what, let's hear from Sergio and then Zainab, and we'll have a full panel discussion.
Thank you.
And I just should mention that we had a wonderful speaker from Oakland Rising, but they had to cancel yesterday. So, but we'll get some testimony from them that we can make accessible to people.
Sure. Good afternoon, Chairman Allen, Ridley Thomas, and members of the committee. Thank you for having us today. My name is Sergio. I'm with Mi Familia Vota, or My Family Votes. My presentation is not going to be heavy on data or numbers per se, but really a narrative of the field work that we do and talking to the community and the challenges that they face in terms of turning out to vote specific to last year's historically low numbers. So I'll start off by saying, you know, one of the things that has come up for us has been the change in location for the polling places has been one of the challenges for folks to be able to go out and vote. In addition to that, just transportation, specifically within Stanislaus County, but very similar to areas like Fresno and both Riverside. Transportation has been an issue for folks in terms of going out and voting. One of the alternatives, I think that's been mentioned earlier today, has been the ability to register on election day to vote. I think that's something they do in Colorado. So I think that would drastically help voter turnout for us.
We should have that in place by 2017.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And then, excuse me, because I got ahead of myself, but just a little background on Mi Familia Vota. So we're a national nonpartisan nonprofit organization. We strive to promote economic justice and social justice through voter education and voter registration. So the three things that we do is voter registration, helping legal permanent residents become citizens, and turning out the vote. So that's our Getting Out the Vote campaign. From my understanding, we're the only organization that works year-round on this issue, and the only organization that actually invites the community to go out and vote. And that's very important because a lot of the times they get information on why to vote, where to go to vote, but an invitation is never really offered to them. The ask is never there. So that's one of the things I'd like to highlight. So going back in terms of the challenges, I think one overarching theme would also be just the lack of access to voting for people of color in particular. A lot of Latinos, particularly folks that are undocumented, that could be seen as a limitation in terms of having access to voting. It's not really talked in the context of a suffrage movement, but the work that we do is really to help particularly Latino communities to eventually become naturalized and vote and have a voice in this country. Other points that have been brought up today, I think when we think outside the box in terms of turning out the vote, online voting registration is another tool that is available in California and that we have on our website that we use. And then two main things that I wanted to also bring up is the cultural change and institutional change. So what I mean by that, I think one of the things that we could be looking at in terms of increasing the voter turnout is catering the election day as a day for the whole family to go out and vote, right? I think we've had conversations about making this a tradition where kind of people get ready for that day with their children and go out and vote as a family, particularly for Latino communities. I think that's very important. And then the institutional change. So right now, every year we go out to high schools, colleges, and universities to do voter registration drives. It's sometimes challenging because administration particularly doesn't want to give up instruction time. Teachers, for the most part, are very open to allowing us to come into the classroom, take up 5 to 10 minutes to talk to the students about why voting is important and getting them to register to vote on the spot. But I think as we move forward, institutionalizing this system could really be a great benefit to get more young people to vote. And just working with high schools, school districts to implement this, I think would help a lot. One of the things that we do and highly promote when we do voter registration drives and door-to-door program is the vote by mail. So we encourage the community. These are conversations we have with folks at the door of the ability to vote before the election day. We talk to them about, look, sometimes you can't turn out that day because one thing or another may happen. And so, we just really encourage early voting. And so I think that's line 15 on the actual voter application line. We make sure that they initial it and that we get that message across. And then the other piece that's been brought up by other presenters is the piece on education, which is really important. When we've done canvassing, some of the people at the door will tell us, why should I vote, but what do I vote for? Who am I voting for? And sometimes, it may be somewhat comical and say, how can you not know? But that's the reality, right? Especially in rural communities like Stanislaus, Fresno, Riverside. Folks just don't know what to vote for, who's running for office, whether it's a presidential or non-presidential election. So I think education, both within the institution and schools and out in the community, is very important from our end in terms of educating folks of what propositions are on the ballot, who's running. Of course, we don't tell them how to vote or what to vote for, but definitely the education is a big component that I think's been brought up earlier today. So that's one point that I would really emphasize. And so there's current legislation right now, right? Like the automatic voter registration legislation, or the bill by Mr. Luis Alejo, AB 400, which promotes voter awareness. So I think we would probably promote things like that, anything that we could do to bring consciousness and awareness, specifically to young people, to go out and vote. That's all. Thank you.
Could you, AB 400, what does it do?
Yeah, so that's it's basically a bill to put signs up on roadways. I think right now, currently, it says something like about alert for the California drought.
This is what Padilla's been talking a lot about, right?
Yeah, I
And it
believe so.
what does it say? Require that sort of thing?
But I would probably refer you to Alejo, who's the author of AB 400. But in sync, what it is, it would post up on the day of the election, reminders to go out and vote. Highway signs. Exactly.
Let me ask you what I asked
Yeah.
Mr. Nissen. Oregon, San Diego County, all male models. Where do you stand on those sorts of things?
We believe, from what I heard earlier, folks have been saying how California is a very big state, possibly hard to implement those models. But I think we just, it's a broad answer, but with the right infrastructure, I think it's very doable.
Okay. I mean, there have been, actually, in both cases of the disabled rights community and Mr. Nissen, if you want to weigh in on this too, but in both cases, I know there were also some voter rights groups that have expressed some nervousness about all mail ballots, but then at the same time, it seems like there's some accommodations that can be made that can make a big difference. Do you have any comments on that, or are you?
I'll have to get back to you on that.
Okay.
For
All right.
now, yeah.
As far as right now, we've always opposed over by mail.
Right now, we are opposed to all vote-by-mail elections simply because people are unable to have a private and independent vote. Certain people with disabilities, they have to have someone else mark their ballot for them, and they surrender their right to an independent vote.
But for one possible way it might work would be to go county by county and have them meet with people with disabilities and see what would be the best option for them.
One way it might work if they went county by county and met with stakeholders, people with disabilities, to see what might work best for them.
Because of the locations of vote centers,
Voice centers, yeah.
mobile voting,
Right.
early voting.
Early voting, right. So that actually, it would be helpful as we're trying to generate ideas coming out of these hearings, if DRC kind of was, you've obviously been listening to our discussions, and it'd be interesting to kind of have you help us with thinking about some of the proposals that have been raised and how we can make sure that the key issues of accessibility for the disabled rights community.
Thank you.
But which is one of the more I report that I gave.
That's one reason that Mr. Neeson wrote the report that he's given to the committee.
Right. Okay. All right. Thank you. Let's move on to Ms. Badi from the Greenlining Institute.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Thank you for allowing me to participate in today's hearing. My name is Zainab Badi, and I'm a policy fellow at the Greenlining Institute, where I focus on voting and election administration's policy. The Greenlining Institute is a public policy organization in the Bay Area that works to ensure that the American dream is within reach of all communities, regardless of race or income. We work in various different policy areas to promote racial equity, and the Claiming Our Democracy program that I work in focuses on increasing access to voting for communities of color and to lift up the voices of traditionally underrepresented groups in the electoral process. For some time now, we've been looking at the issue of language access to identify what's working and what can be improved for limited English proficient, also referred to as LEP voters. And how LEP voters receive information, the effectiveness of the information they receive, and how they're outreached to. We know that voter registration rates and turnout rates are significantly lower among Latinos and Asians, and one explanation for this might be because of language barriers that exist, especially among older voters and recent immigrant voters. So I want to take some time to discuss our most recent study on language barriers for LEP voters. So to learn more, we conducted some focus groups after the November election with community-based organizations and bilingual poll workers that directly serve LEP voters. And what we found was that most voters who need materials in other languages often don't know that they're available, or if they do know, they don't know how to request materials in their language. And another major problem that we heard was that official voting information from the state was too confusing. We heard this from LEP voters and English fluent voters, who we talked to in a previous voter information project after the 2012 election, that the complexity of the materials is a barrier. So this barrier exists for both English fluent voters and for LEP voters because English is translated word for word from the state voter guide and other official election information materials. So we have some recommendations. The first one is that all outreach materials come from the state and counties to voters be in plain language and designed in a way that's easy to navigate and digest. And this goes for English materials and translated materials. Another way to mitigate the problem of lack of information is for the state to develop a comprehensive outreach plan and partner with community-based organizations. These groups directly serve and interact with the most underrepresented communities, and they're best situated to outreach to limited English proficient voters. Community-based organizations can improve their civic engagement efforts if they know how many members of their community are registered and how many have been missed. Most of these groups do not have the resources to purchase this information from vendors. Meanwhile, the state regularly produces voter registration reports that include registration numbers and rates by county, party affiliation, and age group. These reports exist to provide a resource to the public, but don't include registration information by race, ethnicity, or language preference, although election officials do track this information. The state should begin including information regarding registration by race and ethnicity disaggregated to the extent possible, and by language group for each county, and this data should be made available to community organizations that are working on the ground. And lastly, better publicity, or as new voter technology gets adopted, things like online voter registration, better publicity and promotion of these tools should include outreach to community-based organizations so that they're equipped with the know-how and the information and the changes that are being made in election administration, and they can take this information back to the communities that they serve and help them become familiar with these tools. So with that, I'll conclude by emphasizing that LEP voters are a large population in California. Obviously, this is a very diverse state. The limited English proficient population is large and growing. Right now, there's 2.6 million LEP citizens who are eligible to vote in the state. And small efforts in improving outreach could empower a lot of voters and have a big impact on voter turnout. And I have copies of our most recent report that I mentioned on LEP voters for members of the committee and the public who might be interested in reading about our recommendations in greater detail. And I'd be happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Alrighty, thank you all for your presentation. Couple of quick points. LEP voters, you said eligible 2.6 million. How many registered?
I'm not sure about the exact number of registered.
But you know those are eligible.
Those are eligible, yeah.
All right, got it. I would just personally ask, I don't have any specific questions, but I would personally ask that each of you from your respective spaces and places help us to continue our intelligent action and focus on electoral reforms, particularly as we seek to incorporate more technology in the system, because I think that can significantly improve access, but it has to be done the right way. We have to make sure that we don't inadvertently make things more restrictive, which can happen from time to time if we're not very, very attentive. And we have to, in my opinion, personal opinion, resist reactionary policy that would create barriers to access. So I continue to invite you to work with my office and the committee, as well as the senators and the Senate Committee on Elections and Constitutional Amendments, because of our laser-like focus on increasing access, increasing participation all across the state, urban and rural. And I think that, Mr. Nielsen, your observation is probably the most impactful, because county by county it really is different. Those are my only thoughts. If you have concluding remarks prior to us going to the next panel, we'll accept those. Anyone? Thank you very much.
Thank you.